Okay, documentary hypothesis. Our German scholar who is named Julius Wellhausen. I'll spell his name for you. Let's see. Documentary hypothesis of Julius Wellhausen. Julius Wellhausen was a German scholar who worked at the end of 19th century, and he came to the conclusion after a very thorough study and analysis of the Pentateuch. Now we're talking about the Pentateuch, the Torah. The Torah could not have been written by a single hand, as it was claimed by the Jewish community. You know that the conservative Jewish community believed that it was Moses who wrote everything in the Torah. Some of those conservative Jewish rabbis and scholars believe that it might have been only the end of Deuteronomy that is not written by Moses but by a student of Moses. Because at the end we have this whole story about Moses seeing the promised land and having his final conversation with God, who tells him that he will not allow him to enter the land. And there it says he dies, or rather it says Moses died and God buried him, whatever that means, right? It becomes clear that Moses' grave is not known, and this is probably relates to this Jewish idea that the ancestors in their tombs should not be venerated. They should not become an object of worship. So even the greatest man they knew, the giver of the law, the leader, the deliverer of the people of Israel, could not be worshipped. I mean, when he's deceased, his grave, his body, his bones could not be worshipped, could not become any kind of object for worship. So Moses dies, nobody knows where he's buried, God buried him, whatever that means. But the ultra-conservative Jews would say that even this was written by Moses prophetically, and they say that this was written through tears. In other words, Moses realized that he's going to die, that God is going to bury him. He saw his own funeral, so to say. So he wrote all of this through tears. I believe this is foolish to say. Excuse my rudeness with our Jewish brothers, but that's what you do when you necessarily, where you feel compelled to protect a tradition of interpretation. Right? So this is not necessarily faithfulness to the text. It's faithfulness to some kind of tradition that has been passed on. Sometimes traditions preserve good stuff and they are, how shall I say, they are faithful to historical reality, but sometimes they're not. And what do we do when they're not? Well, we dismiss them. So now we live in 21st century, and basically 19th, 20th century have been a century of critical analysis of ancient texts. And believe it or not, in 20th century people know a lot more about the text as a text, talking about the Torah, than the people who probably participated in its formation. And I'll tell you why. Because today we have the modern devices to decipher languages. We have computers who can make critical analysis much more much more precisely than the human brain, right? Today we have all kinds of scientific ways to prove or to suggest the age of a text, the origin of a text, or we're much more aware of foreign influences into our languages. In other words, today we understand the DNA of language much better than any generation before us. Now, I'm putting something in brackets. Remember that when Daniel finished his book, the Lord told him to seal it because it's not for him. It's for others who will come at the end of the age, at the end of time, who will open this book and understand it. So in other words, it could very well be that we know a lot more about the book of Daniel than Daniel himself. And that is a paradox. But it is. Okay? So, it was at the end of the 19th century when the German theologians, who are known to be critical minds, started analyzing the text and making dissections, so to say. They chopped it in pieces and they really realized that this cannot be a single hymn for various reasons. One of the reasons is the use of the name of God, which clearly points out to the fact that people were not absolutely, how shall I say, people would not absolutely agree throughout history what is the true name of God. Now, we are used to the idea that God has many names and that we can freely use all kinds of names, right? But these names, they usually relate to what God is able to do, or His omnipotence, His all-presence, and they're also some sorts of, they're not so much personal names, they're titles, right? So we can use all kinds of titles all the time. It was also the case in antiquity, but people were very careful what is the name that they invoke in prayer, to whom they sacrifice a sacrifice, right? Because in the ancient days, when you place an animal on the altar, you gotta be sure that it is the right God that receives it. Okay? So the use of the name of God is a way to understand or to trace or to prove the fact that there were different traditions, that later on were blended into one tradition. Okay? So Julius Wellhausen claims that there are at least 4 traditions that shape the Pentateuch, the Torah. The first one he calls the Yahwistic. J is used for Yahweh in the German language. So this is Yahwistic tradition. This is a tradition in which God was known as Yahweh. Yahweh. This is the so-called tetragram, which is the 4 letters that abbreviate the name, which was revealed to Moses at the burning bush, at the Mount of Sinai, where later God will meet with Israel and give them the law. So, it's very clear in the Bible that there was such a tradition, because in many places God has been addressed as Yahweh Elohim, which means in our Bible it is translated as the Lord God. Very often, especially in our translations of the Bible, Yahweh, the personal name of God, will be translated as Lord. I'll give you an example. The first time we see this is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. Genesis 2, verse 4. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. In the Hebrew text it goes when Yahweh Elohim created the earth and the heavens. So Yahweh Elohim. According to Wellhausen, the Yahwistic tradition, as it is called in German and in English, is a tradition that was shaped in the south. This is very invisible. It's green. It was shaped in the south. In other words, in Judah. In the southern kingdom. You know that the monarchy is united. The kingdom of Israel is a monarchy only for 100 years, approximately. From that point on, after the death of Solomon, we have division of the kingdom. And so we have a few hundred years of divided kingdom, north and south. So it was in the south. This is the theory of Wellhausen, which is being approved and heavily critiqued by many. It was in the south where God was known to be Yahweh, or the Lord. So in this tradition, there are few predominant features. God has been displayed anthropomorphically. That means human-like. God is very much like a human being. God is very jealous. God is very passionate. God loves. God comes to human beings. He has eyes. They wander around. His hand is holding his sword. He wages war against his enemies. He's riding on a horse, or he's riding on a chariot of cherubim. So he's very much like human being. Not only that, but he's very involved with human beings and the cosmos that he has created. Now, I'll be using the word cosmos, which means universe or world in the technical term. In the Greek sense, this is the created world. Now, when we talk about the cosmos, we usually think of, the space around us. So God is very much involved with his own world. He's a provider. He punishes people. He brings them rain. He punishes them with drought. Oh, he's very engaged. He's very involved. Later on, when we look at the theology of origins, we'll see the distinctions between the way the Yahwists, or the people who represent Yahwist theology, see the story of creation, how they tell the story, and we'll contrast it or put it in contrast with another tradition that is very different. So God is very much present. God is very much in theology. We call this, God is very immanent. God is there. God is there for us, and he's very much like us. Or, I should rather say, we're very much like him. That's another way. He's greater than us. He's not made in our image. We are made in his image. Alright? So, in the Pentateuch, you'll see places where God is addressed as Yahweh or Yahweh Elohim, and in other places he's not. And you can see clearly, for example, if you make an analysis of the story of the flood, you'll find out that there were two stories of the flood which became one story. I'll give you an example. One story says that Noah or that the Lord brought only pairs of animals into the ark. But there's another story that says that he took 7 of the pure animals. Right? So these are different ways to understand the flood. So there are two different accounts how long it took for the rain to stop and then the waters to disappear. And if you make careful analysis of the use of the name, you'll find out that these were two different accounts that were later on put into one account. Although, for the careful reader, for the critical reader, it becomes apparent that these were two different traditions. But the people who blended it into one didn't have a problem of doing this. So obviously they were having a different understanding of what it is to compose sacred texts. Well, initially, those people probably did not know that they were the hand of God, that they were the instrument by which the divine revelation will come to humanity. Now, this is a much later presumption, much later statement, much later claim. Remember, yesterday I told you that because of the destruction of the temple, and this is very important for you to know, that because of the destruction of the temple, the Jewish people become canonical. The Jewish religion becomes a canonical religion. In other words, the sacred texts, or the texts that reveal our faith, become a point of identity. They become our new identity, because those texts, they can travel with us no matter where we go. That's why the great writing of texts happened in Babylon. Alright? In the womb of the country that enslaved the Jews. And instead of swallowing them, right? Instead of annihilating them completely, instead of creating a context in which they lose their faith and they just blend with the other nations and the other religions, what happened in Babylon was exactly the opposite. The Jewish people became very radical, very zealous for their faith. And so they started writing texts because that was their new way of identifying themselves as the covenant people, as the people of Yahweh, the God creator and Savior. Right? So after the return from Babylon, they came back with texts that were produced in the time of the exile, and that is very clear with Nehemiah and Ezra, and particularly with Ezra. And from that point on, we have production of texts like never before. Because the Jews have realized the temple could be destroyed. But if we have our texts with us, we are fine. We know who we are. We will not lose our historical memory of what God has done for us and how special we are. Alright? So, this whole understanding that the text in the Bible is a sacred text, a divine revelation, is an understanding of a much later origin that appeared in history among people who were very confused, who were very dismayed about why the exile happens to them and why, being the people of God, the loved people of the covenant, they suffer so greatly. Alright? So, Yahwist with emphasis on God's immanence, God's presence. But then we have another tradition. And by the way, Wellhausen says that the beginnings of this tradition is mostly 10th century, most likely 10th century before Christ, so 1,000 years before Christ, in the time of David's kingdom. Probably this is the rise of Yahwism. Then Wellhausen claims that there's yet another writer or another tradition that has to be identified with the letter E, which stands for Elohim, or Elohist is the writer of that tradition, in that tradition. This is a tradition that knows God as Elohim. And basically, the word El, which stood for God, the general word for God, is the foundation of many other names, like El Shaddai, El Elyon, and so forth. Right? So here we have more general title for God, or general name for God, which was used very much in the Middle East. You understand that the Hebrew language is part of a family of languages called Semitic languages. So in most of the Semitic languages, God was addressed as El something. So El is God. But you know, every culture, even until today, uses a general term for God. And when you say God, you don't specify what you really mean. Right? Because now when we say God, we Christians think of one thing, but when the Muslim people say God, they think of another thing. Of another being, I should rather say. Same thing with the Jews. When they say God, they think of another being. Right? So, the Elohist tradition, according to Wellhausen's theory, was shaped in the north. It was shaped in the northern kingdom that is called Israel after the division of the people of God. And it was developed after the year 922 onwards, of course before Christ, because that was the year in which the kingdom divided. In the context of division, these two groups, south and north, they start theologizing or creating theology or making theology in conflict with their brothers. You understand that when one group of people who had the same faith splits into two, very often they fight with each other to prove to one another or to each other who is the right group, who are the right people, actually. So it could be the case that the northern kingdom chose one of the names that was known even before, the very same thing with the Yahwistic, to differentiate itself from the others, from the other backsliders, right? So this could have happened very naturally. We don't know whether this was the case or not. It's just a suggestion, a hypothesis. But it is an important one because it makes us aware that it's not that simple. Moses wrote the 5 books. Okay? Alright. Good. It's a lot more complicated. So, in the northern kingdom, God was known as El, and that was very understandable because the Canaanites, especially the Phoenicians who lived up in the north, in the modern-day Syria, whose language is very, very similar to the Hebrew language, and it is believed that the Hebrew language comes out of this Phoenician sort of language, or is, let's say, it's family related. It's very close. The alphabet looked very much identical and so forth, especially in the more primitive forms of the alphabets. They're hardly distinguishable. In the north of Israel, where the Phoenicians lived, God was known as El. And El was the most high God. Because like in many other religions, the Phoenicians, or the Canaanites, they had a religion that entertained the idea that there is a whole pantheon of gods. In other words, there was a structure of divine beings that are structured in certain way, like a pyramidal way. On top of this pyramid was the god El, the Father God. This is something very similar to later beliefs, like the belief of the Greeks, who believe that Zeus is the Father God. He is on top of the pyramid. He is the commander of all the gods. right? He's the one who has most power over all of the gods and nature as well, human beings. And later on we find this in Roman, in Latin belief, that where Jupiter is the father god, right? So El was very close to, linguistically, it was very close to the ideas of the pagans, right? So very differently than the Yahwist tradition, the Elohist tradition develops the idea that God is transcendent. God is beyond the borders, beyond the limits of this world. Yes, He takes care of this world. He is involved in it, but not so intimately, not so privately. Right? He is wholly other. He is very different. He cannot be explained. And very often when He wants to do something, He just speaks. He doesn't have to calm down, look around. He doesn't have to have an armor. He doesn't have to have a chariot and ride with it. So we don't have this anthropomorphic language used by the Yahwist tradition. So in a way, God is more distanced, detached from the world. He's the superior power. And in that sense, you cannot have such a personal and intimate relationship with Him, because He's such a great power that, okay, He cares for you, but He's unapproachable. Right? The next tradition, according to Wellhausen's theory, is the Deuteronomist. Deuteronomist, actually. Deuteronomist, D, Deuteronomy. This is a tradition that was shaped shortly before the exile, let's say 7th century before Christ, and worked very intensively at least until the 5th century. This is a time of great composition of texts, very intensive writing. The Deuteronomists, they were using different names of God, but the text that they were composing predominantly circled around history and law giving. They were concerned about history and law giving. And the organizational principle of their ideology is the idea of a covenant. Covenant. God is in special covenant with Israel. This is their great, grand idea. Now, it is interesting enough that the Deuteronomists, who have written most of the text in the Torah and in most of the books of history, historical books, like 1st and 2nd Samuel is a Deuteronomist work. The 2 books of the Kings is a Deuteronomistic work. Now you can write them down because this is helpful. It will be a key for you to understand why the story has been narrated in this way. Then Joshua, Judges. Most likely Ezra, Nehemiah. Has been written by them. I have a small chart that I can print out for you, which is a suggestion of which portions of the Torah are written by whom, and not only the Torah, but as you see, the Deuteronomists have written a great deal of material that is now part of the Old Testament. So they are the people who basically believe that Israel was a chosen nation. And now, since we're so much influenced by them, and why are we? Because we read texts that were written by those people believing that they were divinely inspired. And so, when you have so many books that are written by this tradition that tell you, that compel you, that Israel is the chosen nation, it's quite natural for you to believe it. But it could be the case that that was not always the faith of the Israelite people, that they were the specially chosen people. That they are more special to God than anybody else. Or let's say, even if they knew it, it was not such a big deal for them. Right? It became a big deal, if I can use that language in theology, after the Babylonian exile and while the people were in exile, because this whole idea of Israel standing in covenant with God was a way of encouraging people to keep their faith no matter what. Right? But then the problem with this theology is that it overemphasizes the special call of Israel, so much so that Israel starts detaching itself from other nations, other faiths, other culture radically. It becomes a self-sufficient people. The temple then is not a place for pagans to come. And the queen of Bathsheba could not any longer come in the second temple that was led by the Deuteronomists, who now, returning back to the land from Israel, start excluding. The older faith of Israel was inclusive. And the point was that all people will come and see the beauty of the temple and the wisdom of Solomon and really admit how great the God of Israel is. But now, in the new situation, in the newly built temple after the exile, we have a different principle at work, the principle of exclusion. We're so special that you cannot belong to us. And, for example, chapter 65 and 66 of the book of Isaiah addresses this whole issue about some Israelites excluding their brothers. You know what Nehemiah did when he came to Jerusalem? He forced many of the Hebrews to divorce their pagan women. That was an exclusion. And of course, we've been trained to think, yes, this is the radicalization of faith. They become now so zealous for God. They're finally as faithful to God as possible. But interestingly enough, Yahweh never comes to dwell in the second temple. And that is a fact that cannot be overlooked. Right? So, it is believed that the beginning of the Deuteronomical tradition, the rule of the Deuteronomists, has to be traced back in the reforms of King Josiah, who found the book of the law. Now this is a key word, the book of the law. One of the priests who was responsible for the remodeling or the refurbishing of the temple found the book of the law, brought it to King Josiah. Josiah read the text, or that's what the story tells, and he repented for realizing that Israel does not stand in good relationship to God, because Israel does not live according to the standards of the book of the law. Now that's what the text says. Now, whether things happened like this historically, we don't know. I'm sorry to say that. Yesterday I told you that there is a difference, I believe, that there is a difference between biblical theology or biblical religion, the religion of the text, and the true day-to-day religion that was practiced by the Judean or the Israelite community. And by the way, yesterday I told you that this is an idea of Stephen Geller, right? And let me tell you where I have it from. And I will lead you to that material, and with that I will stop and we'll have a break. But it's very important. This article that he has written called Biblical Religion, I need to check whether that was the title of it. I'll give you the exact title. Yes, Religion of the Bible. That's the name of the article, which is being published in a great work called the Hebrew Study Bible. If you can acquire that modern translation, that will be a very useful read for you. Now, the Hebrew Study Bible is a project of Oxford University, and it's the most contemporary translation from the Hebrew text into English. And now this is the working of a great group of scholars, both Jewish and Christians, who are experts in the Old Testament and in particular books of the Old Testament. So, in the Hebrew Study Bible, you do not only have the most contemporary, up-to-date translation of the Hebrew text, but you also have very meaningful introductions to all the genres, to every book of the Bible, and you have all sorts of footnotes and references that explain difficult texts, certain technical language that the Bible uses, and it is done by the best scholars. Now, it is approved by the Jewish community, which is a big deal, because they say yes to what is written there. And now, along with it, at the end of the Hebrew Study Bible, you have several very important articles that will totally unlock for you how to interpret the Bible, what is biblical religion, how the texts were shaped, text critical models and stuff like that. So, a lot of conservative seminaries do not any longer teach that model, saying that this is outdated, it is wrong, it's not true. Well, let me tell you, the Hebrew Study Bible has published articles and has published theological explanations that entertain totally the idea that there was such a thing. They will not totally agree probably with Wellhausen about which text comes from where, because after putting the thesis, he starts doing a very sophisticated analysis which text comes from where. Now, our interest so far is there such a thing or not? Was it Moses single-handedly writing down the 5 books or not? Because if he was not writing all of these texts, then we need to get into thinking who did the rest of the writing, the preservation of the text, and then presenting their ideology as if that was Moses. Why in the world would they do that? Right? Okay, so the Hebrew Study Bible. So Stephen Geller's article, Biblical Religion, or the Religion of the Bible, is right there. And it tells you. We have a religion that is written in a textual religion, which represents ideology, and we don't know how much this corresponds with the reality it was day to day. That was practiced day to day. And you see, you need to understand that today the biblical scholar has the Bible in one hand, but archaeological proof in the other. Because now the earth speaks, the dead speak. I'm quoting Israel Finkelstein, one of the great controversial Jewish archaeologists, who says, okay, you read the Bible, but I read artifacts. So if we want to be up to date, and if we really want to speak into our modern, into a modern language, to the modern contemporary generation, we really need to understand that, in the other hand, we need to have the voice of the earth. I mean, what has been unearthed, and it's quite a lot at this point.